Veritas in tenebris. Lumen ad revelationem.
The humid Alabama air carried secrets heavier than the summer heat, secrets buried deep within the crumbling walls of the old Wentworth estate. Locals still whisper about the twin daughters born to its master, Margaret and Marian, women so eerily identical that even their mother couldn't tell them apart. They moved together, spoke together, even breathed in unison. But it wasn't their likeness that cursed their name into the soil of history. It was the man they both loved. He wasn't a suitor from town or a family friend. He was a slave, one they shared behind locked doors, bound by desire, envy, and sin. What began as curiosity turned into obsession, and obsession gave birth to something neither heaven nor hell could explain. When both sisters found themselves pregnant by the same man, the whispers began. And when the children were born, the screaming never stopped. The Wentworth plantation stood far from the main roads, tucked deep into the swamps of southern Alabama. The year was 1853, and its owner, Edward Wentworth, had built his fortune on sugar and sorrow. His twin daughters, Margaret and Marian, were said to be his pride, two flawless reflections of southern beauty. Yet behind their porcelain faces, something darker simmered. The twins were inseparable. As little girls, they finished each other's sentences. As women, they dressed in matching gowns and played piano duets in the candle-lit parlor. Their laughter echoed through the mansion like a haunting melody. But when Edward bought a new slave named Elias, everything began to unravel. Elias was unlike the others, quiet, strong, and strikingly handsome. He'd been taken from Louisiana, where his resistance had cost him a family. Edward intended to break him, but Elias never fully bowed. His defiance drew the eyes of both sisters, though for different reasons. Margaret, the elder by 6 minutes, saw power in him. Marian saw gentleness. Both saw something forbidden. At first, they visited him under pretense, bringing food, water, or tending to his wounds. But soon, those visits turned into long, silent stares. When Margaret came to him one night, trembling with both fear and longing, she whispered, "Do you hate us?" Elias didn't answer, but when she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. The next night, Marian came instead, and Elias, believing it was Margaret again, touched her the same way. By the time he realized what had happened, the line between them had vanished. Each night, one of the sisters would sneak into his quarters, never revealing who was who. To Elias, it felt like one endless night of passion and punishment. To the sisters, it became a secret war. Weeks turned into months. The twins' bond began to rot. Margaret accused Marian of stealing her soul. Marian accused Margaret of wanting control over everything, including love. Their laughter stopped. The piano gathered dust. Servants whispered that the sisters no longer spoke, only watched each other with glassy, hateful eyes. Then came the sickness. Both women fainted within days of each other. The plantation doctor confirmed what no one dared to say. They were both with child. Edward Wentworth's rage shook the house. He demanded to know which man was responsible. Neither sister spoke. When he threatened to sell half the staff, Margaret finally confessed, not to save herself, but to protect Elias. That night, Edward had Elias dragged from the quarters, beaten until his skin split like bark, and hung him from the oak behind the house. The twins screamed, clawing at their father's arms as he watched Elias take his last breath. "You've shamed my blood," Edward spat, "and now you'll bear it alone." The twins were locked in their rooms for months. Their cries echoed through the halls at night, sometimes in unison, sometimes answering one another like ghosts. Servants claimed they saw Elias's shadow moving across the walls, or heard the sound of chains rattling in the nursery that hadn't yet been used. When the children were finally born, something unspeakable happened. Margaret's child came first, a pale boy with strange golden eyes. Marian's child followed, identical in every way, but when the midwife placed them side by side, one began to cry while the other stayed silent. Moments later, the quiet one turned cold. Marian screamed until her throat bled. Margaret tried to comfort her, but Marian's grief twisted into hatred. "You took him from me," she hissed. "Now your son will carry his curse." Margaret, shaken and delirious, began to believe her sister's words. The line between guilt and grief blurred until both women began to see Elias in their dreams, calling to them from the hanging tree. The plantation began to decay. The crops rotted, the animals refused to breed, and Edward fell ill with fever. He wandered the halls at night, muttering Elias's name. The sisters, locked again in their rooms, began writing letters to each other. Letters filled with accusations, apologies, and madness. Months passed, and the surviving child, Margaret's son, grew into something unnatural. His eyes followed things no one else could see. He laughed at night when the wind was still. One morning, the servants found Marian's door wide open and her bed empty. Her nightgown was found near the oak tree, soaked in dew and something dark. Margaret never spoke again after that. She sat by the window, holding her son and staring at the tree. When Edward died, she had the bodies buried together, Elias, Marian, and the stillborn child, in one unmarked grave beneath the roots. She told the undertaker it was to keep them close. Years later, when the plantation was abandoned, locals began calling it the House of Two Wombs. Travelers who wandered too near claimed to see twin figures in the windows at night, and a man's shadow swaying gently from the oak. Some even swore they heard babies crying from beneath the ground. When the land was finally sold and bulldozed, workers unearthed 3 coffins tied together with iron chains. Inside the smallest one lay a child's skeleton, its eye sockets fused together as if formed from 2 skulls that never separated. The medical examiner called it a freak of nature. The locals called it Elias's revenge. Today, nothing stands where the plantation once did. But if you drive down County Road 17 on a humid night, you might catch a glimpse of the tree still standing in the field. Its bark is scarred, its roots twisted, and if you roll your windows down, you might hear 2 voices whispering in the dark, in perfect unison. "He belonged to both of us." And somewhere beneath that whisper, if you listen closely, you'll hear a third voice, deep and hollow, breathing from the roots of the earth. "You all belong to me." From birth, Margaret and Marian Wentworth were inseparable. The Alabama air seemed to hum differently when they entered a room, 2 reflections moving as one. Their mother died giving birth to them, leaving their father, Edward Wentworth, to raise 2 daughters who looked so alike. Even the servants whispered that God had made a mistake, repeating the same soul. They grew up on the Wentworth plantation, surrounded by whispers of the enslaved and the scent of magnolias mixed with decay. The bond between the sisters went beyond affection, it bordered on the supernatural. When one fell ill, the other weakened. When one cried, the other's eyes filled with tears, even from separate rooms. As children, they shared everything, clothes, secrets, even dreams. People claimed they spoke in unison, finishing each other's thoughts before the other's lips moved. But time is cruel to perfection. When they reached womanhood, their mirror, like harmony, began to show fractures. Margaret was strong-willed, demanding, born with a cold confidence inherited from her father. Marian, gentler and more sensitive, often yielded to her sister's shadow. Yet beneath her fragile voice lay a hunger for freedom, for love, that burned brighter than Margaret could see. The bond that once made them whole was now the chain that would drag them both to ruin. In the summer of 1853, Edward Wentworth purchased a new slave from Louisiana. Elias, tall, striking, and silent, Elias carried an air of defiance that unnerved even his master. His body bore the scars of punishment, yet his eyes, dark and burning, revealed no submission. He worked hard but spoke little, and soon became the subject of plantation gossip. When the twins first saw him, something stirred. Margaret watched him from the balcony as he worked in the fields, his sweat glistening under the harsh sun. Marian saw him later, tending the horses, and felt an ache she could not name. Both sisters began visiting him, offering water, kindness, and curiosity disguised as pity. But pity turned to fascination, and fascination to desire. Late one night, Margaret went to the slave quarters, driven by something she couldn't explain. Her trembling hands brushed against Elias's skin, and for the first time, the man who had endured chains felt another kind of bondage, lust mixed with sorrow. The next night, Marian went instead, believing she could feel what her sister had felt. She did not know Margaret had already been there. The confusion was deliberate, both women using darkness to hide their sins, and so began the unholy exchange. Elias became trapped between two souls so identical, he could no longer tell them apart. The forbidden became routine, and soon love, if it could be called that, turned into torment. Weeks passed. What began as secrecy became rivalry. Margaret accused Marian of stealing her nights. Marian accused Margaret of stealing her heart. The sisters stopped speaking, stopped playing piano, stopped smiling. Servants noticed the tension. The once harmonious twins now avoided mirrors, as if afraid to see the reflection of their own guilt. Margaret's love turned into possession. She believed Elias belonged to her because she came to him first. Marian, desperate for something pure, began to dream of running away with him. The house grew colder, and the air thickened with envy. Each night, Elias endured the same confusion, unable to resist or differentiate them. His will was broken not by whips, but by the same faces that haunted his every waking moment. Their father sensed the unrest, but assumed it was womanly hysteria. He had no idea that under his roof, a sin so monstrous had taken root that even the land would later refuse to bear fruit. The twins' obsession with Elias became a curse that fed on their very likeness. A single soul split into two, both damned. When both sisters fell ill, the plantation doctor was summoned. His diagnosis froze the household. Both were pregnant. Edward Wentworth's fury ignited like wildfire. He demanded to know who had defiled his bloodline. Neither sister spoke. Their silence enraged him further. He locked them away, denying food and comfort, threatening to sell every slave until the truth emerged. It was Margaret who finally confessed, not for guilt, but for control. She claimed responsibility, but Edward misunderstood. He believed Elias had forced himself upon them both. The following night, Elias was dragged from his quarters, beaten senseless, and hung from the oak tree behind the mansion. The sisters screamed, pounding on their doors, as his lifeless body swayed in the moonlight. From that moment, something inside both of them broke. The house filled with sobbing, prayers, and the ghostly echo of chains. Edward's pride became his punishment, for the next generation born under his roof would not carry his name, but the legacy of the man he murdered. The oak tree behind the Wentworth plantation became a symbol of horror. The morning after the execution, servants refused to go near it. They said the bark bled sap that smelled like iron. At night, dogs barked at nothing. Edward ignored it all, claiming guilt was for the weak. But guilt was already crawling through the walls. Margaret and Marian, confined to their rooms, began to hear Elias's voice calling them, sometimes through the wind, sometimes from within their own minds. "You promised me love," he whispered, "now you'll carry my pain." Their pregnancies grew heavy with dread. The night before labor, thunder rolled across the plantation. Edward dreamt of Elias standing beneath the oak, eyes burning, ropes still around his neck. The next morning, Edward found the bark of the tree carved with twin initials, M, W, and a message, "He belongs to both." When the births came, so did death. Margaret's son was born first, pale, golden-eyed, and unnervingly quiet. Marian's child came next, identical, yet lifeless. Her screams filled the house until her voice was gone. She blamed Margaret, convinced she had stolen her child's soul. From then on, the plantation decayed. Crops withered, livestock died, and the nights filled with crying no one could trace. Edward became delirious, muttering Elias's name until he died choking on his own blood. Marian disappeared one stormy night, her white gown found near the oak. Margaret buried what was left of her family and lived alone, her surviving son staring blankly into shadows no one else could see. Servants said the child spoke in two voices, Some claimed he laughed in his sleep when the wind passed through the oak. Margaret kept him close until her final breath, whispering lull decades later, when the plantation fell to ruin. The legend of the Wentworth twins became a warning told by old folks on humid nights. Travelers said they saw twin figures standing by the tree, holding hands, watching the road. Others heard babies crying beneath the roots. When workers excavated the land years later, they uncovered 3 coffins chained together, Elias, Marion, and a small child with fused skulls, as if 2 lives were trapped in one body. Scientists called it an anomaly. The townsfolk called it justice. Now, nothing remains of the plantation but the oak tree, its branches twisted into shapes that look like reaching arms. On quiet nights, the wind carries 3 voices, 2 whispering in unison, and 1 humming low, the voice of a man who never truly died. Labies not meant for the living. Thank you for watching Obscure Testament. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying stories from the shadows.